Have you ever made a snap judgment about someone, only to find out you were completely, painfully wrong? Like, the kind of wrong that doesn't just make you feel embarrassed, but actually makes you question the kind of person you thought you were? If you're watching this right now, there's a good chance you've witnessed something similar in your own life. Maybe even recently. Maybe someone was mocked, disrespected, or dismissed in front of you, and it didn't sit right. Well, in this story, you're going to meet a man who did just that, judged a total stranger based on something as personal and permanent as a tattoo. He laughed. He pointed. He even called her a disgrace. But what he didn't know, what nobody expected, was that the ink on this young woman's arm wasn't just a random design or some rebellious artwork. No. It was something much, much deeper. And the moment he found out what it really meant, everything changed. That's the mystery you came for, and I promise you, we're going to unpack every second of it. But before we dive in, I want you to think about something for a moment. Imagine you're at your local gas station, grocery store, or favorite coffee shop. The clerk behind the counter has visible tattoos, maybe on her forearm, maybe behind her ear. Now, pause. Be honest. What's the first thought that flashes in your mind? Be real with yourself. Do you wonder if she's into heavy metal? Do you assume she parties a lot? Or maybe, just maybe, you think she's made some bad decisions. If any of that sounds familiar, you're not alone. You see, we've been conditioned by media, by school, by outdated ideas, to associate tattoos with rebellion, recklessness, even criminality. But here's the twist. In today's world, especially here in the US, tattoos often carry stories. Deep ones. Stories of love, of loss, of family, of faith. Sometimes they're a way to hold on to someone who's no longer with us. And in this story, that couldn't be more true. Now, if you've ever lost someone, I mean really lost someone, you know that grief doesn't just vanish. It clings to you, follows you through your day, waits silently in your memories. And for some people, a tattoo becomes more than just a symbol. It becomes a lifeline. That's exactly what it was for one young woman named Ava, a quiet, hardworking store clerk in a small southern town, where judgment came fast and apologies came slow. She wore her memorial ink proudly, even though she knew not everyone would understand. And most days, she didn't need them to. But on this day, something happened. A stranger walked in. Loud. Rude. The type who thought the world owed him something. And when his eyes caught Ava's tattoo, everything spiraled. But hold on, because this isn't just a story about a rude customer and a misunderstood tattoo. It's a story about regret, about silence, about the power of one sentence that could shatter a man's pride and bring him face to face with a truth he never expected to hear. And you, right now, are about to witness how a single insult can unravel a chain of emotions, ones we bury, ones we ignore, and ones we're too ashamed to admit. This story is real, it's raw, and if you stick with me, I guarantee you're going to feel something. Anger, empathy, maybe even guilt. But that's what makes this journey worth it. So, why should you keep watching? Simple. Because you're about to see something that rarely happens in real life, and almost never gets caught on camera, a person confronting their own ignorance in real time. And I don't just mean getting called out and walking away embarrassed. I mean stopped cold, emotionally undone, left speechless in front of a crowd of people. And what led to that moment? That's where things get deep. Because the story behind Ava's tattoo, the one that made this customer fall to his knees, is something most people wouldn't believe until they saw it for themselves. Let me be clear, this isn't a viral prank or some fake gotcha moment. This is a real-world lesson playing out in a place we all recognize, a convenience store that could be in your neighborhood, your hometown. And in a country where tensions run high, where assumptions run wild, and where empathy often takes a back seat, stories like this matter. They remind us that we never know what someone else is carrying. They remind us that not all pain is visible. And sometimes, what looks like just another tattoo is a silent scream for someone who's gone. And here's where it gets really personal. Because the man who insulted Ava, his name is Curtis, didn't walk into that store planning to ruin someone's day. No, he was dealing with his own problems. Fired from his job. Arguing with his son. Lashing out at strangers to feel powerful for a moment. We all know a Curtis. Some of us are Curtis on our worst days. But what happens when someone like that says the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong time? What happens when his words cut deep into a memory Ava fought every day to protect? The moment she looked up, locked eyes with him, and said the one sentence that made everyone in the store freeze, that was when everything changed. That was the turning point. But here's the catch. I'm not going to tell you what that sentence was. Not yet. Because that's where the story flips, and you're going to want to see it unfold exactly as it happened. Trust me, the reaction will leave you stunned. So don't click away. Don't scroll. Because every second from here builds toward a confrontation that no one in that store, not even Ava, saw coming. And when the truth comes out, it doesn't just stop one man in his tracks. It stops everyone watching. So, buckle up. Stay with me. Because the moment you came here for, the one you saw in the title, it's coming. And when you hear what Ava says, when you learn the story behind that tattoo, and what it really meant to her, you'll understand why Curtis's face turned pale, why he reached for his wallet with trembling hands, and why the other customers suddenly went silent. Because sometimes, life throws us a moment that forces us to change. And for Curtis, that moment came with ink, memory, and a truth no insult could ever erase. But here's what no one knows yet. Not the clerk, not the customers, and certainly not Curtis himself. Because just when you think you understand what's happening, something else surfaces. A photo. A name. A connection that links Curtis and Ava in a way neither of them could have predicted. And when that truth is revealed, it won't just change the way he sees her. It'll change the way he sees everything. Stay with me because you're not going to believe who Ava's tattoo was really for. It had been a rough year for Ava. Not the kind of rough you post about on social media or casually mention to coworkers when you're running late. No, this was the quiet kind of pain, the one that creeps into your mornings, clings to your afternoons, and whispers through the nights. She had recently transferred to this small town after leaving behind a life in Chicago that had slowly begun to unravel after her brother, Logan, died. To everyone else, it probably looked like she was just starting over. New job, new town, fresh ink on her forearm that peeked out just beneath her rolled-up sleeves. But the truth was, Ava wasn't running toward anything. She was running from the silence, from the birthday that never came, from the calls she kept replaying in her head. That tattoo, inked just above her wrist in stark black and gray, was the only thing keeping her grounded. It wasn't just a name. It was a lifeline to the only person who had ever truly understood her. What most customers didn't know, and what Curtis never stopped to ask, was that Ava had once been a college student with plans for med school. She had a promising path, full of late-night study sessions and endless caffeine-fueled dreams. But everything changed after one cold November evening, an accident, a phone call, and a funeral that should have never happened. Her brother's death hit like a freight train. It wasn't just that he died, it was how. A hit and run. No suspect. No resolution. The police chalked it up to a tragic accident and moved on. But Ava never did. And every morning, when she slid on her name tag and stood behind that counter scanning energy drinks and scratch-offs, she thought of Logan. How he used to laugh too loud. How he texted her just seconds before he crossed that street. How she was supposed to meet him that day, but canceled last minute because of a study group. That guilt never left her. That's why the tattoo mattered. Curtis, on the other hand, wasn't thinking about any of that when he stormed into the store that morning. He had just come from a heated exchange with his ex-wife, who was threatening to limit his custody visits with their teenage son, Mason. The argument had left him feeling powerless, so when he saw Ava's tattoo, bold and visible like a challenge, it became an easy target. In his mind, it represented everything that was wrong with the younger generation, too emotional, too loud, too careless with their appearance. And because he couldn't control what was falling apart in his own life, he tried to control something else. His insult wasn't just about the tattoo, it was about everything he was carrying that he didn't know how to express. He saw ink and assumed rebellion. He didn't see the grief, or the story, or the reason she never took a lunch break. And maybe that would have been the end of it. A rude comment, an awkward silence, a customer storming out. But what Curtis didn't realize was that someone else in the store that day recognized Ava. Not just as the quiet cashier with the haunted eyes, but from before. From Chicago. From that night. He didn't speak up right away, just stood quietly in the snack aisle, pretending to look at beef jerky, while his eyes kept drifting toward her tattoo. He knew that name.
He remembered that name.
Because he was there. And suddenly, what started as an ordinary day in a small-town convenience store began to spiral into something far more dangerous. Because that man, unshaven, wearing a faded baseball cap and carrying a deep scar just below his chin, had secrets of his own. And he wasn't just passing through town. But before we dive deeper into who he is, let's back up a bit. The store Ava worked at had recently installed a new security system after a string of late-night break-ins in the area. Management told the staff it was routine, just precaution, they said, but Ava noticed something strange about the timing. Just days after the cameras went live, the same man began showing up. Not every day, not even regularly, but just enough for her to notice. Always at odd times, never buying much. And every time he came, he lingered, watching her, watching the tattoo. She couldn't shake the feeling that she'd seen him before, but her memories of that night were a blur. Flashing lights, panicked voices, cold pavement, and her brother's phone lying cracked on the ground. Still, something about that man didn't sit right. And here's where things start to get murky, because while Ava was focused on surviving each day, going home to a near-empty apartment, scrolling endlessly through old photos of Logan, and leaving voice memos to a number that no longer worked, other things were happening in town. A young woman had recently gone missing. The police weren't saying much publicly, but whispers had started circling. Someone said she worked at a gas station not far from Ava's. Someone else mentioned a man matching the description of the one who kept watching Ava. But nothing was confirmed. No arrests. No suspects. Just fear and rumors. And while Ava wasn't the kind of person to jump to conclusions, something about the way the man looked at her made her stomach twist. Especially after what he mumbled under his breath the last time he left. Some things never stay buried. At the same time, Ava began receiving anonymous notes, slipped under the back door, scribbled in shaky handwriting. They weren't threats, exactly. More like warnings. You're not the only one who remembers. Sometimes the dead speak louder than the living. She didn't tell her boss. She didn't tell the police. Mostly because she didn't want to be seen as fragile. Again, she was already this sad girl with the ink, and she wasn't about to hand anyone more ammo. But deep down, she was rattled. Because these notes weren't just generic. One of them included a phrase her brother used to say when he was nervous. Something only a few people would have known. Which raised a terrifying question. Who was sending them? And how did they know Logan? Meanwhile, Curtis kept returning to the store, unable to shake the memory of Ava's stare after he mocked her tattoo. Something about it haunted him. And the more he thought about it, the more he began to realize how familiar the name inked on her arm sounded. Logan S. He couldn't place it at first, but late one night, while scrolling through old news articles, it hit him. He'd read about Logan's death. Not because he was interested, but because his company had been under contract for a street paving project near the area where the accident occurred. There had been questions about whether the street was properly lit, whether the signage had been up to code, whether negligence had played a role. Curtis never looked too deep back then. He was just another manager, and legal told everyone to keep quiet. But now, seeing that name again, seeing Ava, remembering the cold way she'd said, "You think this tattoo is a joke? It's the only thing keeping me alive," he started to wonder if he had been closer to that tragedy than he ever realized. And still, the man with the scar kept coming. Watching. Listening. Ava began to piece together fragments of memory. A black car. Screeching tires. A man running. A glimpse of a face in the rearview mirror. Could it be him? Was this the man who hit her brother? Was he taunting her now? Or was it someone else entirely playing a cruel game? The tension wrapped itself around her like a vice. And as the days passed, she felt more and more like the walls were closing in. No one believed her, not fully. Her coworkers thought she was just grieving. Her landlord brushed off her complaints. And Curtis, who once mocked her pain, was now watching her with a mix of guilt and something else, fear. Because here's the twist you didn't see coming. Ava wasn't the only one being watched. Just when Ava began to feel like the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to click, like maybe, just maybe, she could figure out what really happened that night, a crushing setback slammed into her. It happened quietly, without warning, the way the most damaging blows always do. One morning, she arrived at work early, hoping to review the new security footage that had been automatically saved to the cloud. She'd noticed the cameras acting up the night before, flickering briefly before the man with the scar appeared, and then again, just after he left. Something told her there had to be something there, some tiny detail she'd missed. But when she asked the manager to let her take a quick look, just 5 minutes, he awkwardly shifted his weight and muttered that the system had crashed. No backup. Nothing. All the footage from the past 3 nights was gone. Not corrupted. Not partial. Erased. The room spun as the realization hit her. Someone had wiped the footage. Deliberately. And they had access. Whether it was someone inside the store or someone manipulating the system remotely, Ava couldn't tell. But it meant one terrifying thing. Whoever she was circling around wasn't just a drifter with a scar and a shadowy past. He was careful. He was watching her closely. And he had resources. She tried not to panic, but that familiar chill crawled up her spine, the same one she felt the night of Logan's accident. That quiet, invisible presence that made her feel like she was never alone, not even in her own skin. Still, Ava wasn't ready to give up. That's when she remembered the thumb drive. A few weeks ago, she'd transferred some clips from the security system to review at home, mostly because she'd been noticing strange behavior from a few late-night customers and wanted to track some shoplifting trends. It hadn't seemed important at the time, but now, it might be the only existing copy of the moments leading up to the man's visit. She raced home, her hands trembling as she dug through her desk drawers. Nothing. She checked the junk bowl by the front door. Still nothing. She tore through every backpack, every kitchen drawer, even her sock bin. The drive was gone. At first, she blamed herself. Maybe she misplaced it. Maybe it fell behind the couch. But something didn't add up. She remembered clearly placing it in the drawer with the receipts and pens just last week. She'd even labeled it store footage. She'd been planning to organize it that weekend. It wasn't just lost. It had been taken. And the only people who had been inside her apartment were the handyman from the complex who came to fix a leak, and her neighbor, Kayla, who dropped off a package that had been misdelivered. Both seemed harmless at the time, but now Ava's mind spiraled. What if someone she trusted wasn't on her side? What if someone close to her was feeding information to the man with the scar? That night, she received another note. This one wasn't like the cryptic ones before. It was typed neat, precise, folded inside a blank envelope and shoved under her door.
Stop digging.
You don't want the truth as badly as you think you do. Let him rest. That last line froze her. Let him rest. It wasn't just a threat, it was a guilt trip. Someone was trying to use her grief against her. Twist her heartbreak into silence. But Ava knew better. The only way Logan would ever truly rest was if she uncovered what really happened. The only way she would sleep again was if she exposed the truth, no matter how ugly it was. But with each new lead came more uncertainty. The man with the scar hadn't returned for 3 days now, breaking his usual pattern. Curtis, oddly, had become quieter around her, not rude, not friendly, but different. She caught him one afternoon staring blankly at the photo pinned to the community board near the register, the one of a candlelight vigil held in Logan's honor. His jaw was clenched, and for a moment, he looked like he might say something. But instead, he shook his head and walked out. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was recognition, and maybe fear. Then came the voicemail. A number Ava didn't recognize, no caller ID. A scrambled voice on the other end said only 8 words before disconnecting. He wasn't alone that night. Neither were you. Her heart nearly stopped. What did that mean? She was never physically at the scene. She'd never even seen the crash. Unless someone was referring to before. The hours leading up to the accident. The texts she and Logan exchanged. the argument they had over the phone, how she told him he was being reckless, that he should just go home, that she was tired of bailing him out. And the worst part? His last message to her, still saved in her phone, said, "I think someone's following me. I'll call you in 10. That call never came. She'd always assumed it was a paranoid thought, or that he was just trying to get her attention. But now she wondered, what if it wasn't? Even more unsettling was the call she received the next morning from Kayla, the neighbor, the only person who'd been inside her place in the last week. She was crying, said her dog had gone missing, but there was something strange in her voice. Hesitation, like she wanted to say something more, but couldn't. Ava pressed gently, asking if Kayla had seen anything unusual around their building. After a long pause, Kayla whispered, "You didn't hear it from me, but I think someone's been getting in when no one's home. I've seen a guy in the alley twice this week. Same clothes. Same walk. Looks like he's casing the building." And just as Ava opened her mouth to ask what the man looked like, Kayla's voice cracked again, this time in fear. She said she had to go, that she'd said too much. Then the line went dead. Now, Ava was more than alone, she was exposed. The evidence she needed had vanished, the people she thought she could rely on were starting to act strangely, and someone in the shadows knew more about her brother's death than anyone had ever admitted. What terrified her most wasn't that the truth might never come out. It was the growing realization that someone, maybe even more than one person, had worked very hard to bury it. But the story doesn't end there. Because later that evening, while going through Logan's old things, she found something she'd completely forgotten about, a worn, spiral-bound notebook with his doodles and lyrics and random thoughts. Most of it was nonsense. But tucked into the back pocket was a folded napkin.
A name. A date.
And a license plate number. And that name? It belonged to someone Ava had already met. Ava stared at the name scrawled in Logan's messy handwriting, her breath caught in her throat. K. Ramirez, 5/19, TX 79V4. The napkin was stained in one corner, the ink slightly smudged, but it was unmistakably Logan style. Sharp loops on his R's, uneven spacing, a kind of rushed confidence only he had when jotting something he didn't want to forget. She didn't recognize the name immediately, but the plate looked familiar. She'd seen it once parked outside the convenience store late at night, a dark SUV with tinted windows that never stayed longer than a minute. At the time, she brushed it off as someone grabbing smokes or a Red Bull. But now it meant something more. Maybe it always had. The next day, before Ava could investigate the name or the license plate, she received a call from her cousin Tyler, someone who hadn't been part of Logan's story for years. Tyler had always been a bit of a drifter, bouncing between gigs and cities, but he was tight with Logan when they were younger, back when they used to skate in empty parking lots and make dumb videos for YouTube before things like brand deals and algorithms mattered. Ava was surprised to hear from him at all, let alone first thing in the morning, and even more surprised by his tone. Panicked, low, like he was calling from inside a closet. He didn't ask how she was or what she was up to. He cut straight to the point. "Did you tell anyone about me and Logan that night?" Ava froze. "What are you talking about?" Tyler's breathing picked up. "Someone left a note in my glove box. I don't know how they got in, but it was just sitting there this morning, wedged between my insurance papers. It said, 'You were there. Stay quiet.'" He paused.
Ava.
"I wasn't there. Not the way they're making it sound." Her heart began to race. The intimidation was spreading. Whatever Logan had been involved in, whoever was trying to silence the truth, they weren't just targeting her. They were going after people he cared about, people who might have seen or heard something and forgotten it, or worse, buried it out of fear. Ava pressed Tyler for more, but he clammed up fast. Said he had to get out of town, that he couldn't afford to be caught up in something like this again. Again, she asked, but he hung up before she could push further. That single word haunted her. Again. It suggested a history she didn't know about. A shared secret between Logan and Tyler, one buried so deep it had only now begun to rot its way to the surface. Ava thought back to the months before Logan's death. He had been tense, distracted. Not the fun, loud, magnetic guy she grew up with. He was showing up late to everything, missing work shifts, avoiding calls. He told her it was just burnout, maybe depression, but now it felt like a lie wrapped in half-truths. What if something had gone down that night? A deal, a confrontation, something big, and Tyler was a part of it. Still reeling from the call, Ava decided to look up the license plate through a friend of hers, Haley, who worked at a mechanic shop and sometimes pulled strings with DMV buddies when they were off the clock. It wasn't exactly legal, but desperate people made desperate choices. Hours passed before Haley texted her back. That plate belongs to a Katrina Ramirez. Lives across town, works at a tattoo parlor on Vine. A chill ran through her. The name matched.
Katrina.
Ava remembered the woman vaguely. A tatted-up, no-nonsense artist who once filled in at the strip mall studio Logan used to hang around. They weren't close, but Ava knew he liked her work. She even remembered a comment he'd made once, something about a piece Katrina was designing for him. A memorial piece. But for who? That night, Ava found herself standing outside the tattoo shop, staring at the glowing sign above the entrance. It was closed. The lights inside were off, but someone was definitely inside. She could see the shadow of a person moving past the glass, deliberately avoiding the front window. Just as she was about to knock, a loud bang echoed from the alley beside the building, followed by the sound of a garbage can tipping over. Ava's instincts screamed to her to walk away, but her feet moved before her brain caught up. She crept around the corner, heart pounding, and saw nothing. Just the can, on its side, and a door slowly swinging shut. Someone had been watching her. The next morning, Ava checked the shop's website and made an appointment under a fake name. She needed to talk to Katrina, face-to-face, no surprises. When she finally sat across from her in the sterile back room, she was struck by how guarded the woman seemed. Her eyes flicked toward Ava's wrists, her collarbone, sizing up tattoo space. But there was something else, recognition, maybe. Or guilt. As the needle buzzed to life, Ava casually asked if she ever knew Logan. Katrina didn't flinch, didn't pause. Yeah, she said flatly. He used to talk about getting a memorial piece. Said it had to be perfect. But he never told me who it was for. That made no sense. Logan had no one else to memorialize. Their parents were alive. He hadn't lost a close friend. Unless he was planning to memorialize himself. Ava's stomach turned. Could he have known something was coming? Could he have been afraid for his life? Was this all some twisted act of premeditated grief? But before she could ask another question, Katrina leaned in and whispered, "Don't ask around about him here. You'll make enemies." Her tone was icy, flat, but the warning behind it was real. Ava sat frozen in the chair, her skin crawling beneath the buzzing of the needle. And just when she thought things couldn't spiral any further, she got a call from Curtis. After days of being cold, detached, something had changed. "I need to show you something," he said, his voice lower than she'd ever heard it. "But we can't meet at the store. Not with what I found." Ava asked what he was talking about, but he wouldn't explain. Just gave her an address, told her to come alone, and hung up. The address led to a rundown storage unit on the edge of town, graffiti-tagged metal doors and overgrown weeds crawling across the concrete. Ava didn't know what she expected to find there, but when she pulled up, Curtis was pacing outside, looking over his shoulder every few seconds. When he saw her, he didn't wave or smile. He just unlocked the door and motioned her inside. And what was inside shattered everything she thought she knew about her brother's death. But before Curtis could explain where the files came from, a phone buzzed inside the unit.
His.
One new message. No sender. Just one line. "You were warned." Ava barely had time to read the cryptic message on Curtis's phone when the power in the storage unit flickered and died, plunging them into a dim half-darkness broken only by the sliver of sunlight seeping under the door. Curtis instinctively reached for his phone flashlight, but before he could switch it on, a heavy thud landed just outside the metal wall, followed by the unmistakable sound of gravel crunching under slow, deliberate footsteps. Ava's breath hitched as her senses kicked into overdrive. Her skin prickled. Her ears strained to hear any hint of who or what was outside. Curtis motioned for silence, pressing a finger to his lips, then gestured toward the file box he'd brought. It was filled with papers, printouts, and a worn leather-bound notebook she hadn't noticed before. He whispered urgently, "Take it. If anything happens to me, you get this to Haley. She'll know what to do." The words rattled in her chest like a warning bell, heavy with a finality she didn't want to acknowledge. But the pounding resumed. 3 heavy, deliberate knocks on the storage unit door. Then silence. Ava and Curtis didn't move, didn't breathe. They waited, hoping whoever it was would walk away, but the footsteps retreated only a few feet before stopping again. Then the sound of a lighter flicking, the subtle crackle of flame. Ava's heart froze. Was someone about to set fire to the unit? She scrambled for her phone, ready to dial 911, when the person outside spoke, their voice muffled but chillingly clear. "This is your last warning. Walk away, Ava, or you'll end up like Logan." Her stomach lurched. Whoever this was knew her name, her connection to Logan, and that she'd been digging.
But how?
How deep did this go, and how closely were they watching her? Curtis pulled open a back panel he had loosened earlier, an emergency exit he'd prepared just in case, and shoved Ava through it before slipping out behind her. They didn't look back. They didn't speak. They just ran through the back alley, ducking behind dumpsters and chain-link fences, desperate to put as much distance between themselves and that voice as possible. Ava clutched the file box tight, every muscle in her body buzzing with adrenaline and dread. They parted ways at a gas station on the edge of town. She returned home and locked every window and door, setting her phone to vibrate while pacing the living room. The silence was oppressive, almost mocking. Even her cat sensed something was off, hiding beneath the couch with wide, unblinking eyes. Ava pored over the files Curtis had handed her, trying to make sense of the chaos. There were records of Logan's bank activity, withdrawals at odd times, checks written to people she'd never heard of, and surveillance photos, actual photos, of Logan outside a club he'd never mentioned. In one image, he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was Katrina Ramirez, the tattoo artist, mid-conversation with someone whose face was turned just slightly out of frame, but something about the body language, the stance, felt eerily familiar. Ava flipped to the next page and felt her blood run cold. It was a photo of her. She was walking out of the store where she worked last week, headphones in, eyes glued to her phone. She hadn't seen anyone that day, hadn't noticed anyone following her, but there she was, captured from across the street. Unmistakably watched, documented, stalked. And it wasn't the only one. There were several photos of her in the stack, at the gas station, outside the coffee shop, even in her own backyard. Someone had been following her long before she knew she was even involved. Suddenly, the story shifted. This wasn't just about Logan. It wasn't just about what he had done, or who he knew. It was about her. Someone wanted her scared, silent, maybe even gone. The box of evidence was now a death sentence, and the more she knew, the more she realized how tangled this mystery had become. She wasn't sure if Curtis was hiding, taken, or worse, but one thing was clear: she couldn't trust anyone, not without proof. The line between friend and enemy was blurred beyond recognition, and now she had to question even the most mundane details of her life. Her thoughts raced as she sat alone in the dim light of her kitchen, the hum of the fridge the only sound in the silence. Why Logan?
Why now?
And how far would they go to keep the truth buried? Her mind replayed Katrina's warning, the strange SUV, Tyler's terrified voice, and the anonymous threat at the storage unit. It all pointed to something massive, something dangerous, and Ava was now at the center of it. Then, just as she closed the notebook to take a breath, her phone buzzed violently across the table. A text message. No name. Just another number. One line. "We see you." Ava's fingers trembled as she stared at the text message, that chilling line, "We see you," flashing like a siren in her mind. She checked the sender's number, but it was masked, untraceable. Every instinct pulled her to run, hide, disappear, but a stronger voice inside pushed back. No more shadows. No more secrets. She grabbed her keys, the box of evidence, and the notebook, and drove across town to the one person she believed she could still trust, Haley. If anyone could help make sense of this twisted puzzle, it was Logan's ex-girlfriend, the only one besides Curtis who'd been there from the beginning. But when Ava arrived at Haley's apartment, the air shifted. Haley greeted her at the door with a strange smile, not quite welcoming, not quite cold, just unreadable. Her living room was meticulously neat, almost too perfect. As Ava placed the file box on the coffee table, she noticed framed photos lining the shelves, not just of Logan and Haley, but of Logan alone, Logan with coworkers, even one Ava had never seen before. Logan and Katrina laughing over drinks at some tattoo convention. Ava's eyes narrowed. "When was that taken?" she asked, pointing. Haley barely glanced up. "A couple years ago. They were friends." Her tone was flat, detached. That's when the shift began. Something in Haley's posture, her clipped answers, the way she kept glancing toward her phone, as if waiting for a call, made Ava's pulse quicken. She opened the notebook and slid it across the table. "Curtis gave this to me," she said slowly. "He told me you'd know what to do with it." Haley stiffened for just a moment, almost imperceptibly, but Ava caught it. "Curtis." Haley repeated. "I haven't seen him in weeks."
A lie.
Ava felt it in her gut. She pulled out the page with the surveillance photos, flipping directly to the one that showed Ava outside the gas station. "Then explain this," she demanded. Haley stared at the image. Her face remained unreadable, but her silence spoke louder than words. Then, finally, she sighed and sat back, her mask slipping ever so slightly. "You weren't supposed to be involved, Ava," she said softly, almost regretfully. "It was never meant for you." Ava's breath caught. "What was it meant for me?" she asked, her voice sharp. Haley hesitated, then met her eyes. "Logan was involved in something bigger than any of us knew, money laundering, information drops, things I still don't understand. Katrina was a link. Curtis too. But the deeper we looked, the more dangerous it became. People started disappearing. Curtis didn't run, he was taken." The ground under Ava's feet seemed to shift. Curtis, taken? By who? And why had Haley lied? But before she could respond, Haley added something that shattered everything. "Logan didn't die because of a car accident," she whispered. "That's what they told us. That's what the police report said. But I saw the footage. His brakes were cut. He didn't swerve off the road. He was forced off." Ava's mouth went dry. "Why didn't you tell me?" Haley looked at her, eyes dark with something deeper than fear, guilt. "Because I didn't know if I could trust you either." That last sentence landed like a slap. All this time, Ava thought she was one of the few outsiders, caught in a whirlwind that had nothing to do with her. But now it seemed she had been watched, manipulated, and used from the very beginning. She pressed further, her voice hardening. "Then why was I being followed? Why were there pictures of me?" Haley looked away. "Because someone thought you had something Logan left behind. Something valuable. We don't know what it is, but whatever it is, it's why he died." And then came the twist that unraveled everything. Haley leaned in and whispered, "You weren't just his friend, Ava. Logan's father, he never knew him. He left before Logan was born. But your mom, she knew him. Intimately. Ava, Logan might have been your half-brother." The words thundered through Ava's mind like a wrecking ball. All this time, the connection wasn't just emotional, it was blood. She stumbled back, dizzy with shock. Her mother had died when Ava was young, but she remembered pieces, fragments, a photo of a man she'd been told was an old boyfriend, one she barely knew. Could it have been Logan's father? Her voice barely escaped her lips. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Haley shrugged. "Because I only found out a few days ago. And once I did, everything changed." Ava backed away, her mind racing. Everything she thought she knew about Logan, about her own family, about who she could trust, was unraveling. She wasn't a bystander in this mystery. She was the center of it. And if someone was willing to kill Logan to keep that secret hidden, what would they do to her? As she turned to leave, Haley's phone buzzed. She checked the screen and suddenly stood, blocking Ava's path. "Where are you going?" she asked, but there was an edge to her voice now. Ava's eyes darted to the door. "To get answers." Haley's face darkened. "Then you better be ready for what comes next. Because the people looking for that notebook?" They're already inside your house. Ava didn't wait. She bolted out the door, her heart pounding louder than her thoughts, the notebook clutched tight in her hand. Everything she thought she knew was a lie. Ava didn't even remember the drive back home. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white, her breath sharp and shallow, like she was holding it underwater. Every passing streetlight cast shadows that seemed to follow her, eyes in the darkness, waiting. By the time she pulled into her driveway, her house, usually a place of peace, looked foreign, ominous. The porch light was off, which was strange. Ava always left it on when she left, even during the day. Her heart pounded louder now, but something deeper than fear was driving her. She didn't turn the engine off. She reached into the glove box and pulled out a flashlight and a crowbar, her only makeshift defense, and slowly approached the front door. It wasn't until she reached for the doorknob that she noticed it was slightly ajar. Inside, the air felt disturbed, like the room had been holding its breath. Drawers were half open, photo frames turned down. Someone had been there, and not just to scare her. They had been searching for something. Ava's stomach twisted as she stepped into the living room, the weight of the notebook under her arm heavier than ever. Her gaze scanned the floor. Shoe prints. Not hers. Mud tracked in from the back patio. She followed the trail to the kitchen, where the fridge door was cracked open and a half-empty water bottle lay on the floor. Whoever was here had taken their time. That realization made it worse. It wasn't a break-in. It was a message. Her phone buzzed violently in her back pocket. Unknown number again. This time, a photo. It was her, sitting in her car in front of Haley's building, taken from behind. Another text came seconds later. Time's up. Choose now. The notebook or Curtis. Ava's knees nearly buckled. She leaned against the wall, staring at the words. The notebook or Curtis. But she didn't even know where Curtis was, if he was even alive. Her mind raced. Could she trust Haley at all? What if this was all a trap? She had no real proof Curtis was being held, no way to verify the threat. But if it was real, if Curtis had been taken because of her, how could she live with that? She sat on the floor, her back against the kitchen cabinet, and tried to think. Curtis had always been the logical one, always playing things close to the chest, but he had protected her. He had risked everything when he gave her that notebook. And now, she might have to choose between saving him or exposing the truth behind Logan's death and possibly uncovering something much bigger. She opened the notebook again, flipping to the back. There, tucked behind one of the last pages, was a folded receipt, dated a week before Logan died. It was from a gas station out of state. Ava didn't recognize the address, but the name on the signature line made her jaw drop. Katrina West. Katrina was supposed to have disappeared a year ago. Everyone assumed she left town after Logan died. Some even believed she was dead. But this receipt proved otherwise. And now the questions multiplied. Why was she still making purchases under her real name? Was it a slip-up or a sign she wanted to be found? And how did she connect to the message Ava had just received? A voice in Ava's head screamed for her to call the cops, to hand everything over and walk away. But she knew what would happen. The moment she gave up the notebook, this trail would go cold. And if Curtis was still alive, that would seal his fate. She couldn't stop shaking as she pulled up the last text again. Time's up. Choose now. The decision clawed at her like fire under her skin. Save a friend who might already be gone, or chase the truth that had already taken so much. Her hand hovered over the phone screen. She typed back, I want proof of life.
Now.
Seconds passed. Then minutes. No response. Just silence. And then the doorbell rang. Ava froze. No one was supposed to know she was home. She crept toward the peephole, holding her breath. But the porch was empty. A shadow moved along the edge of the yard, slipping into the dark like a ghost. Her phone vibrated again. This time, a video. It was short, less than 5 seconds, but enough to gut her. Curtis, tied to a chair, gagged, a fresh bruise on his cheek, eyes wide with panic. No location, no voice, just a silent, screaming warning. Another text followed. You have 12 hours. Meet us alone. Bring the notebook. Or he dies. Her lungs burned. This wasn't just a puzzle anymore. It was a war. One where trust was dangerous, time was bleeding out, and the wrong move would cost a life. But before Ava could even decide her next step, her phone buzzed with another message, this time from Haley. Just 2 words, they're lying. Ava stared at the screen, her heart now split between 2 impossible truths. If Haley was part of the trap, Ava was walking right into it. But if Haley was trying to save her, ignoring her warning could cost everything. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Inside her, the storm only deepened. There was no safe way forward anymore. Only survival, and a truth too dangerous to remain buried. The moment Ava crossed the county line under a moonless sky, her hands trembled on the wheel, heart racing like it was trying to leap from her chest. The GPS led her down a winding back road toward the coordinates they'd sent, an abandoned industrial lot on the outskirts of Ashburn, the kind of place where old secrets went to rot and new ones were born in blood. As she turned onto the gravel road, dust billowed in her headlights. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around. But in the passenger seat lay the worn leather notebook, now barely held together by a rubber band, and in her gut sat the image of Curtis, bruised, terrified, silent. She couldn't stop.
Not now.
Not when the truth was finally beginning to claw its way through the cracks. She parked near the broken fence line, stepped out, and immediately felt the air shift.
Heavy.
Electric. Someone was already watching her. From behind a rusted container, a shadow stepped forward. It was Haley, her arms raised, her face grim, lips pressed tight like she hadn't slept in days. Ava froze. "You're not supposed to be here," she hissed under her breath, but Haley just shook her head. "Neither are you. But if you hand that notebook over, you're not going to walk away from this lot." That's when it hit Ava. Haley wasn't here to help her. She had never been. She had been the one feeding information all along, acting like a lifeline while tightening the noose. Ava's stomach twisted. Her breath caught in her throat. Before she could move, a car pulled up behind them. Black, unmarked, tinted windows, and 3 men stepped out. 2 of them wore tactical vests. The third was in plain clothes, mid-50s, the kind of man who looked like he belonged behind a desk, not in a gravel pit. But when he spoke, his voice cut like steel. "Miss Hart, you've stirred up quite the mess." He wasn't angry. He wasn't even raising his voice. That made it worse. "You weren't supposed to have the notebook. Curtis wasn't supposed to talk. And Logan, well, Logan didn't follow orders. You can see how that worked out." Ava's knees almost gave out. "You killed him," she whispered, the betrayal catching in her throat. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Logan had a purpose. Until he didn't. That's how operations work. Ava couldn't breathe. She looked at Haley, who now refused to meet her eyes. "How could you?" she asked, voice cracking under the weight of the moment. Haley's face twisted, not with guilt, but with resignation. "I didn't know at first. But once I did, it was either fall in line or disappear like everyone else." She nodded toward the building behind them. "Curtis is inside.
Alive.
For now." The man in the plain clothes stepped closer. "This goes far beyond Logan. Beyond you. That notebook doesn't just contain records. It holds names. Names of federal agents, covert operations, politicians with a lot to lose if this sees daylight. We're not talking about local crime. We're talking about a national security breach. You understand now why you can't walk away with it." It was no longer just about Curtis. Or Logan. Or even the betrayal. This was a full-blown government-level cover-up. And Ava, just a tattooed clerk who had stumbled onto something while mourning her friend, had become the final loose end. But they underestimated one thing. Ava wasn't just here to make a choice. She was here to expose the truth, no matter the cost. From her back pocket, she slowly pulled out a second phone, one they hadn't checked. It was already live, already streaming. Hidden camera lens pinned under her hoodie's drawstring. The stream was going straight to a secure cloud and broadcasting on a channel she and Curtis had set up months ago, just in case. A trap for a trap. But before she could even feel relief, gunfire rang out from the second level of the abandoned warehouse. The men scattered. Haley ducked. Ava hit the ground and rolled behind a truck frame. More shots. Screams. A voice, familiar, shouted from above. "Ava, run." It was Curtis. Disheveled. Bleeding. But free. He must have broken loose. She bolted to the side as Curtis tossed down a bag, her old gym bag, filled with something heavy. The men were scrambling, radioing for backup, but Ava had already grabbed the bag and sprinted behind the fencing. She and Curtis tore through the yard, adrenaline flooding their systems, every step a miracle. They didn't stop until they were half a mile away, breathless, collapsed behind a row of hedges near a gas station. Curtis looked at her, pale but burning with intensity. "It's not just Logan," he rasped. "They've done this before. To others. Whistleblowers. Investigators. And Haley. Haley was part of a program designed to keep it quiet. This isn't one agency, Ava. It's a network. With funding. With reach." Ava's hands trembled as she opened the gym bag. Inside was a hard drive, stacks of printed files, and 3 burner phones. "Everything Logan died trying to leak," Curtis said. "It's all here." But before they could decide their next move, Ava's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number again. But this time it wasn't a threat. It was a warning. "You think you're safe. You've just scratched the surface. If you go public, we come for your family next." Ava felt ice in her spine. Curtis leaned over and showed her his phone. Same message. Different number. The conspiracy didn't end in that gravel pit. It was just the beginning. The rain started as a light drizzle, but within minutes, it turned into a torrential downpour that seemed determined to drown everything in its path. Ava and Curtis stood beneath the flickering streetlight in front of the abandoned warehouse, soaked to the bone, staring at the building where the final truth was hidden. They had no backup, no plan, just the burning urgency of knowing they couldn't walk away without exposing what they had uncovered. Everything had led to this moment, the betrayal, the threats, the shadowy messages that kept pushing them deeper into a conspiracy that stretched far beyond their understanding. Now, standing in front of the looming structure, they both knew the stakes had escalated beyond their worst fears. Whoever had orchestrated this web of lies wasn't just powerful, they were untouchable. Ava gripped the hard drive in her hands, the weight of it pressing down like a 1,000-pound anchor. She could feel the weight of every secret it contained, every person who had been silenced, and the lives that had been destroyed for the sake of one unchecked agenda. Curtis's eyes met hers, dark with determination, but also something else, something that wasn't quite fear, but desperation. "We can't back out now," he said quietly, his voice strained. "Whatever happens in there, we have to expose them. We've come too far." Ava nodded, but her thoughts were already racing. She had thought that the truth would set her free, that exposing the corruption would bring an end to all the madness. But the closer they got, the more she realized that the truth might be the thing that destroyed them. They moved silently toward the building's entrance, trying to avoid the glaring eyes of security cameras that, by now, had probably already been rigged to track their every move. But as they reached the door, something caught Ava's attention, an unexpected sound, a faint scrape of metal on stone. She froze, eyes scanning the darkness. Then she saw him, a figure emerging from the shadows. It was Haley. Her face was pale, eyes wide with fear, but she wasn't here to help. Her body language screamed tension, like she was caught between 2 worlds, both of them dangerous. "I shouldn't have come," Haley whispered, her voice trembling. "They're coming for you, Ava. You have to leave now." Ava's mind raced, her heart pounding. She couldn't trust her anymore, couldn't even trust her own instincts, but Haley was standing there, visibly shaking, terrified. The questions, had she been playing both sides all along? Had she truly turned against Ava and Curtis, or was she trying to warn them at the last possible moment? The tension in the air was palpable, and for the briefest moment, Ava hesitated, torn between pressing forward and taking whatever warning Haley had to offer. Then, Like a shot in the dark, the door behind them swung open. Two men, masked, emerged from the shadows, guns drawn. Ava's pulse surged as the cold metal of a gun pressed into her side. Curtis pushed her behind him instinctively, but they were trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. "End of the line," the taller man said, his voice low and authoritative. "You should have stayed out of this." Ava's breath caught in her throat as the figure stepped into the light. It was the man from the gas station, the one who had been pulling strings from the very beginning. She had suspected something about him, but now, standing face to face with him, she finally saw the truth. This wasn't just some hired hand. This was someone who had been orchestrating everything from the start. He wasn't just an agent or a corrupt bureaucrat. He was the architect of it all. "Your friend was too loose-lipped," the man continued, his eyes narrowing at Curtis, who stood defiant but trembling with anger. "And you, Ava, you've proven yourself to be far more trouble than you're worth." Curtis opened his mouth to say something, but the man silenced him with a single gesture. Ava felt the weight of his words, every betrayal, every piece of the puzzle suddenly clicking into place. This wasn't just about the files, the messages, the threat to her family. This was about power, control, and the lengths some people would go to keep their secrets buried. But then, just as the man raised his gun, Haley moved, faster than anyone could react. She slammed into the masked figure, knocking him off balance. The gun went flying, and chaos erupted. Ava couldn't think, couldn't move, as everything around her descended into utter confusion. Curtis lunged at the second man, taking him down with a punch, but Ava's attention was fixed on Haley. She wasn't sure if this was an act of redemption or another betrayal, but she didn't have time to ask. The entire building seemed to come alive with movement, footsteps echoing, voices shouting from the far corners of the warehouse. Amidst the chaos, Ava's eyes locked onto something she hadn't noticed before. A set of files stacked high on a desk, untouched, forgotten. She didn't know why, but she felt an overwhelming urge to grab them. As she reached for them, her heart stopped. Staring back at her from the first page was a name she had never expected to see: Logan Taylor. This wasn't just about the government. This wasn't even about Ava. This was personal. The room seemed to freeze. Curtis's face turned ashen. "What?" he breathed, barely able to speak. But Ava was already shaking the papers free from their pile, flipping through them with frantic urgency. It was a ledger. Names, dates, encrypted codes. But then she saw it, the final entry. Logan Taylor, final directive, eliminated for attempting to leak classified documents to civilian press. The truth hit her like a freight train. Logan hadn't just been a whistleblower. He had been set up, framed, and then silenced.
But the bombshell?
The name next to his, Haley Danner. The files weren't just about exposing a conspiracy. They were about protecting a legacy of corruption and lies, and Haley was deeper into it than Ava could ever have imagined. The realization struck like a thunderclap. As Haley's voice trembled behind her, Ava slowly turned. "You don't understand," Haley whispered. "I didn't have a choice." But it was too late for explanations. Ava wasn't listening anymore. The pieces had finally snapped together, and the truth was worse than she could have ever imagined. The conspiracy she'd stumbled upon wasn't just some faceless organization. It was a machine built on deception, fueled by the very people she had trusted most. And now, in the heart of this chaos, the final twist was unfolding. Haley had been a part of the system all along. The enemy had been standing beside her from the beginning. But that wasn't the worst part. As Ava stared at the files in her hands, the realization hit her like a brick to the chest. She wasn't just caught in the web. She was part of it. The system had manipulated her from the start, and now, with no way out, the only thing left was to expose the truth and pray that someone, somewhere, would listen before it was too late. The clock was ticking. The game was over. But the war? The war had only just begun. Days had passed since that chaotic night at the warehouse, but Ava still couldn't shake the weight of everything that had unfolded. She stood alone in the park, watching the golden light of the setting sun cast long shadows across the quiet space. The world around her seemed to move in slow motion, as if time had momentarily stopped to give her a chance to breathe. But even in the calmness of the moment, there was a lingering heaviness in her chest. The truth had been exposed, the files, the corruption, the betrayal. Curtis had vanished, having disappeared without a trace, and Haley had been arrested for her role in the conspiracy. But somehow, the victory felt hollow. No matter how many pieces she'd put together, no matter how many lies had been unraveled, there was no sense of closure. There was only the echo of all the lives ruined by the secrets she had uncovered, and the knowledge that no matter how much she'd fought, it hadn't been enough to change the bigger picture. She'd done what she could, but now, as the sunlight faded into the cool embrace of evening, she realized something crucial. The truth wasn't just about exposing the conspiracy, it was about understanding the deeper cost of power and the lengths people would go to in order to keep their control. Ava had played a role in that cycle, unknowingly at first, but now fully aware of her part in it. She had to live with that knowledge, with the weight of every decision she'd made along the way. But there was also the undeniable fact that things couldn't stay the same. People had been hurt, lives had been shattered, and no matter what, Ava knew she couldn't undo the damage. But she could keep going. She could choose to use what she knew to make a difference, even if it was just one small step at a time. As she walked through the park, the cool breeze brushing against her skin, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her fingers trembling slightly as she saw the name on the screen, Logan Taylor. For a moment, she hesitated. Was this the final piece to the puzzle? The truth about everything she'd uncovered? Or was it just another manipulation? Another ghost from the past coming to haunt her? But as she answered the call, the voice on the other end was unmistakable. It wasn't Logan. It was Curtis. His voice, raspy and strained, barely a whisper, cracked through the silence. Ava, they know everything. His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She didn't even need to ask who they were. She already knew. You need to disappear. You need to leave before they find you. There's no safe place anymore, not for either of us. Ava's heart raced as she felt the ground beneath her shift. She had thought that the worst was over, that the conspiracy had been exposed, that the danger had passed. But now, standing in the park with the phone pressed to her ear, she realized just how wrong she had been. The truth was still out there, and it was far from finished. The weight of it all pressed down on her, and in that moment, she felt the sting of the reality she had been avoiding. There would never be peace. The battle, the war, it was ongoing. It was bigger than her, bigger than Curtis, bigger than anything she could have ever imagined. As the line went dead, Ava looked around her, feeling the weight of everything she had lost and everything she had yet to face. The light of the setting sun had almost disappeared completely, leaving only the lingering shadows of the night. In the distance, the faint sound of sirens echoed, but it didn't matter anymore. The game had changed. She had changed. And nothing would ever be the same again. She turned to leave the park, each step heavy with the realization that she was no longer running toward anything, but away from something far more dangerous than she had ever anticipated. The story wasn't over. The mystery wasn't solved. There were no neat conclusions, no happy endings. What she had learned in the process was that there are truths that people aren't meant to know, that some doors are better left closed. But Ava had opened them, and now she would have to live with the consequences. As she disappeared into the night, the wind carried with it the promise of something more, something dark, something waiting just beyond the horizon. And somewhere, out there in the shadows, the truth was still alive, still turning, still waiting for someone else to come looking. And as Ava vanished into the unknown, she realized that no matter how much she tried to escape, the past had already made its mark on her. The only question left now was whether she would ever be able to outrun it. The final twist? It was just beginning.